Hey subscribers, welcome back to the channel, Pro Carry Trucker. I'm going to do another history video here. Last one I did was last weekend, and that was on the non-importation agreements. We are at the Boston Massacre, and I'll let you know now. I hope you watch the whole video, but I'm going to let you know now. This one's a little bit longer. Generally, when I print out my information. I print out multiple sources. I go through and highlight what I want to use, what I think is relevant, and then I copy that into my notebook. And generally, I will have, like the non-importation agreement, I got one page, flip it over, and I've either got part of the next page, the back side, or maybe that whole back side, but basically 2 pages is it. Well, on the Boston Tea Party, I have front, back, front, back, front. The importance of this incident is significant, very significant to the revolution, and I just did not feel right cutting as much out of it. Let's get started. The Boston Massacre was a deadly riot that occurred on March 5th, 1770 on King Street in Boston. That's a little skewed there. It began as a street brawl between an American colonist and a lone British soldier. Quickly escalated to a chaotic, bloody slaughter. The conflict energized anti-British sentiment. The conflict energized anti-British sentiment and paved the way for the American Revolution. If you remember back at the Townshend Act, which wasn't the last video, it was the video before. The Townshend Act, the Declaratory Acts, the taxes that Britain started imposing on the colonists. There was some minor conflicts, and in the summer of 1768, customs officials, no, that wasn't it. October 1st, 1768, Britain brought in troops from England and Nova Scotia to occupy Boston. And then, as you can imagine, like I said in my video on the Townshend Act, it didn't go over very well. They didn't like it. And that's kind of what brings us up to the Boston Massacre. My last video on the non-importation agreements, I told you the Sons of Liberty was going to be a big, be talked about a lot. It's going to be a big group. Tensions ran high in Boston in early 1770. More than 2,000 British soldiers occupied the city of 16,000 colonists and tried to enforce Britain's tax laws. Like I said, that was the Townshend Act, when they brought in the soldiers from Britain and Nova Scotia. Viewers from my area, imagine 2,000 troops occupying a town the size of, let's see, 16,000. So roughly the size of Effingham, maybe the size of Mattoon. 2,000 troops don't sound like really a whole lot, but a town that size, 2,000 troops is quite a bit. And the colonists didn't like it. I brought up in the last video, the Sons of Liberty. went from covert actions to civil unrest and violence. Here's a big violence. Skirmishes between colonists and soldiers and between patriot colonists loyal to Britain, called loyalists, were increasingly common. To protest taxes, patriots often vandalized stores selling British goods and intimidated store merchants and their customers. So when they were boycotting British goods, some places went ahead and sold the British goods, paid the importation tax, paid the taxes on them, and sold them. They were boycotted and vandalized, and their customers were harassed. February 22nd, during a small incident, Customs Officer Ebenezer Richardson, who lived near the... Okay, wait a minute, I'm going back up here. I missed it. That's the spot. Patriot colonists will increasingly common. Okay. Intimidated store merchants and their customers. There was this one store that was being targeted, I guess, on February 22nd during a small incident, and Customs Officer Ebenezer Richardson, who lived near this store, fired through his window, hitting and killing an 11-year-old boy named Christopher Sider, Seider. I don't know if that's Cedar or Cider, and further enraged the Patriots. You can imagine a British official killing an 11-year-old child. What that's going to do to the colonists. Several days later, a fight broke out between local workers and British soldiers. It ended without serious bloodshed, but helped set the stage for the bloody incident yet to come. On the evening of March 5th, 1770, Private Hugh White was the only soldier guarding the king's money, stored inside the customs house on King Street. It wasn't long before angry colonists joined him and insulted and threatened violence. At some point, White fought back and struck a colonist with his bayonet. Pretty sure y'all know what bayonet is, but by chance, if you're not sure what the bayonet is basically a long blade. I would say they range anywhere from 12 to 16 inches long, maybe 18, and it's like a knife, fits on the end of a firearm. In retaliation, the colonists pelted him with snowballs, ice, and stones. Bells started ringing throughout the town, which generally warned of a fire. Of course, that brings a mass of male colonists into the streets. As the assault on White continued, he eventually fell and called for reinforcements. Back in the Revolution, I'm not sure how that was done. They didn't have radios, so he couldn't key the mic and ask for reinforcements that way, but he fell. Somehow he called for reinforcements. In response to White's plea and fearing mass riots and the loss of the king's money, Captain Thomas Preston arrived on the scene with several soldiers and took up defense position in front of the customs house. Worried that bloodshed was inevitable, some colonists reportedly pleaded with the soldiers to hold their fire, while others dared them to shoot. Preston later reported a colonist told him the protesters planned to carry off White from his post and probably murder him. The violence escalated, and the colonists struck the soldiers with clubs and sticks. Reports differ exactly what happened next, but after someone supposedly said the word fire, a soldier fired his gun although it's unclear if the discharge was intentional. It might have been a unintentional discharge, negligent discharge. There is no accidental, in my opinion, there is no accidental discharges. There's negligent discharges. Once the first shot rang out, other soldiers opened fire, killing 5 colonists, including Crispus Atticus, a local dock worker of mixed racial heritage, and wounding 6 among... Okay, let me back up here. Killing 5 colonists, including Crispus Atticus, a local dock worker of mixed racial heritage, and wounding 6. Among the other casualties of the Boston Massacre were Samuel Gray, a rope maker, who was left with a hole the size of a fist in his head. That tells me he was shot more than once. He was hit more than once. Sailor James Caldwell was hit twice before dying, and Samuel Maverick and Patrick Carr were mortally wounded. Within hours, Preston and his soldiers were arrested and jailed, and the propaganda machine was in full force, both sides of the conflict. Preston wrote his version of the events from his jail cell for publication, while Sons of Liberty leaders such as John Hancock and Samuel Adams incited colonists to keep fighting the British. Sons of Liberty, they want to keep that tension up. They want to keep the fight going. As tension rose, British troops retreated from Boston to Fort William. I believe Fort William was on a island. Let me check. That's where I got most of my information. I think it's on this one here. I know I get it. I know I saw it on here. Yeah, Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hudson ordered the British soldiers be withdrawn to Castle Island. So, but it was why did I not mark where I was? They retreated to Fort William, which I'm guessing was on that island. Paul Revere, which we all know from the American Revolution, encouraged anti-British attitude by etching a now famous engraving depicting British soldiers callously murdering American colonists. It took 7 months to arraign Preston and the other soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre and bring them to trial. Ironically, it was American colonist, lawyer, and future president of the United States, John Adams, who defended them. You're thinking, okay, how did somebody that defended the British become future president? But Adams was not a fan of the British, but wanted Preston and his men to receive a fair trial, as the death penalty was at stake, and the colonists, especially Adams, didn't want the British to have an excuse to even the score. Certain that impartial jurors were non-existent in Boston, Adams convinced the judge to seat a juror of non-Bostonians. Adams argued that confusion that night was rampant. Eyewitnesses presented contradictory evidence on whether Preston had ordered his men to fire on the colonists. Witness Richard Palms testified that this was in quotes, but I can't say it verbatim, but basically what Richard Palms testified was, after the gun went off, I heard the word fire. So he's saying the gun was actually, the first shot actually came before the command. The captain and I stood in front about half between the breech and the muzzle of the guns. So basically what I'm understanding there is if my arm is the barrel of the gun, this is the back of the barrel, this would be the breech, this would be the barrel, they'd be standing about here. The muskets back then had very extremely long barrels. I don't know who gave the word to fire. Adams argued that unreasonable doubt existed. Preston was found not guilty of murder. The remaining soldiers claimed self-defense, and all were found not guilty of murder. Two of them, however, Hugh Montgomery and Matthew Kilroy, were found guilty of manslaughter and were branded on the thumbs as first offenders per English law. Major impact on relations between Britain and the American colonists. Further incensed colonists already weary of the British rule and unfair taxations, and roused them to fight for independence. Over the next 5 years, the colonists continued the rebellion and staged the Boston Tea Party, formed the First Continental Congress, and defended the militia arsenal at Concord against British soldiers, effectively launching the American Revolution. So, the Boston Massacre is basically, all these videos I've done before is just what's basically irating the colonists. They're wanting to kind of get away from Britain. They want to be their own country. They're just, I guess, looking for the match to ignite the cake. Well, this definitely done it. Today, the city of Boston has a Boston Massacre site marker at the intersection of Congress Street and State Street, a few yards from where the first shots were fired. That I did not know. I ever get back out to Massachusetts, I'd like to see that, which I plan on doing here one of these days. I want to get out to Virginia, see Arlington. I do want to get to D.C., see the White House, the Lincoln Monument, Washington, the historical monuments. And then now that I know this, Boston's going to be on the list. Check out the corner of Congress and State Street and see that marker. We are fully into conflict now. My next video will be, I'm going to have to check. There's June 9th of 1772 was the Chesapeake Affair. I'm going to have to see exactly what that is. May 10th, the Tea Act. 1773, May 10th, the Tea Act, and then December 16th, the Boston Tea Party. I will probably do the Tea Act and the Boston Tea Party as one video. Got the Boston Port Act. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Looks like I'm thinking the next the rest of the videos are going to, the rest of these incidents are going to be setting up for independence. They're going to start the documents needed. It's going to be just outright conflict. It's war. We're at war. So stay tuned for the next video. Hopefully I can get a thumbs up on this one, and we will catch you next one.